My name's Zeo, and this video is aimed more at those outside our fandom. What the is PSO2NGS? Maybe you have this one friend or family member who's always playing this one darn crazy anime sci-fi MMORPG. You're probably curious about certain facets of the game and why your friend or loved one might enjoy it so much. Maybe this well-meaning individual is too lazy to explain it themselves, or they struggle to find the words. Well, lucky for you, I am a Phantasy Star Online 2 veteran who's played the game on and off for the past 12 years. For brevity's sake, we'll just call it PSO2 going forward. Yes, fantasy with a PH is a legitimate spelling. For starters, I am going to assume you at least know what a video game is. Dear God, please at least know what a video game is. So, what exactly is an RPG? And by extension, what is an MMORPG? RPG stands for role-playing game. These games have you assuming the role of a band of heroes tasked with traveling the world and completing various objectives. This is done by the player visiting different locales throughout the world and interacting with its inhabitants to advance the story. These games are based on narrative and character development and are thus dialogue heavy. These stories range from your basic beat the big bad, save the world narrative set in a high fantasy world to more complex and nuanced geopolitical struggles set in worlds that aren't too different from our own. Battles usually take place on a different screen, with both the player's group and the enemies taking turns hitting each other. The battle ends whenever one side is victorious. The player gradually becomes stronger by winning these fights. There are also action RPGs that use these principles, but fights take place on the map you're exploring. These games aren't meant to be played from start to finish in one sitting and often take around 10 to 40 hours to finish the main story. Now, with an MMORPG, that concept is expanded to others from around the world. The MMO part stands for Massively Multiplayer Online, which means there are multiple people connected to the game through the internet. These are essentially big virtual online worlds. These games are operated by the companies who created them and often require players to buy the game and in some cases pay a monthly fee to log in. Others are totally free to play and they make their money through selling in-game cosmetics and quality of life features. Phantasy Star was actually a pretty old franchise going all the way back to the late 80s, around the same time as Final Fantasy. It went dormant for the latter half of the 90s but came back in late 2000 with Phantasy Star Online for the Dreamcast. It was a big deal back in the day because this was the first online RPG for home consoles. It did help pave the way for games like Monster Hunter, Final Fantasy XI, and Final Fantasy XIV. Phantasy Star Online 2 came out in 2012 in Japan and then 2020 internationally. So if you want to go down a fun little rabbit hole, I made a video about that. Phantasy Star Online 2 New Genesis, or just NGS, came out in June of 2021. You can hop back and forth between the two, essentially making it two games in one. They both have their own story and progression, but for the sake of this video, we'll stick with NGS. After you make your character and pick your class, you gain levels and get stronger by killing enemies and completing quests, especially the main story. The 4 main regions unlock as you go through the story. This number here at the top of my status window is my battle power. Think of it like item level in World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy XIV. This determines what kinds of quests I can do. Higher level fights are going to require more battle power. But the real number I want to beef up is potency. So since my main class is Slayer, that uses ranged potency. So what I want to do is get that number next to the blue gun icon as high as I can. So how do I do that? Well, I do that by strengthening my weapons and armor. You enhance your weapons by using other weapons, and the higher your enhancement level, the more augment slots you can have. Now the stuff you see me wearing is some of the best in the game right now as of this recording. So unlike other games, combat is action-based. There are 10 classes in total, each with their own set of weapons and signature abilities. So each weapon has its own set of special moves called photon arts that use a resource called photon power, or PP. Some weapons are better balanced than others. They all have their own unique weapon action, which is often used to block oncoming enemy attacks. Whenever I block an attack, I can clap back with a spicy counterattack depending on what weapon I'm using. So I just keep hitting the monster as hard as I can while using resources as they become available, and when the monster fights back, I do my best to block or dodge its attack, then follow up with my own counterattack. 99% of enemy attacks can be dealt with through either blocking or sidestepping. There are some attacks that'll hurt you no matter what, but those aren't till very late game though. You'll know those attacks when you see a bright glowing orange effect. And then you have the loot. The majority of it isn't that great. The real draw at endgame is that faint glimmer of hope for that one drop, whatever the strongest tier of weapon happens to be. If it's a popular weapon like, say, a gunblade, it'll command a hefty price tag on the player shops. That's been one of the game's biggest issues so far. But the main draw for this game would have to be its robust character customization options. You can change parts of your character such as their outfit, their hairstyle, hair color, proportions. What some people do with the system is make themselves look like characters from other popular anime, video games, and Western TV shows, even comics. This is what's called cosplay or costume play. What you're looking at right now is my version of a Moogle from the Final Fantasy franchise. The game's totally free to play, but they pay the bills by selling what's called Arcs Cash or AC in exchange for real-world money. A lot of the cosmetics come from a system called the AC Scratch. Now how this works is you pay a little bit of real-world money in exchange for an item chosen at random from a list of available items. These are usually based on a particular theme. You can either keep what you get for yourself, or you can turn around and sell it for in-game money called meseta. The more desirable outfits, emotes, and accessories are usually worth a lot of meseta. If you do enough of these, you'll get a ticket that you can trade in for whatever item you want from that scratch. These usually run for about a month before being rotated out with something else. There's always at least 3 or more of these in rotation at any given time. They usually bring back the more popular stuff during what's called a revival scratch. This is what's called a gacha. It works just like those capsule toy vending machines you see outside of grocery stores. The term gacha is a Japanese term short for gachapon. Gacha represents the sound the machine makes whenever you turn the crank, and pon is the sound of the capsule popping out. There was also what's called a complete gacha. Now how that worked is you'd get a bonus item after obtaining a specific set of items on a list. These were really big in Japan for a while. People would keep spending money until they got all the items they need to get to the bonus item. It wasn't unheard of for people to dump hundreds of thousands, even millions of yen into these games. So you could tell these games were quite lucrative for the companies that operate them, but they got nuclear heat from consumer activists and parents. The companies who operated these games had their stock prices go down the toilet in the wake of the blowback. The Japanese government even got involved. PSO2 was initially planned to have one of these, and it was actually in the closed beta. This whole thing popped off soon after the beta wrapped up, and Sega took it out of the final game. Emotes are another thing that people like in this game. These range from your basic greetings to goofy dances. There are even more risque ones.
We'll pole dance for money, Kupo. Oh wait, wrong franchise.
Part of why this game has an M rating here in the US. Hopefully this gave you a good idea of how the game works and why so many of us enjoy it so much. And if by some miracle you actually join the friend or loved one that sent you here, welcome to Phantasy Star. I stream on Twitch a few nights a week too, if that's your thing. Come on by and hang out sometime, we'd love to have you. Anyway, that's a wrap. I hope you have a blessed day. And remember, to the don't self be true. Until next time, farewell.